Loud. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third and final Lunch and Learn with Doctors Without Borders. Super excited today to have a logistician with us, Beri. I was saying a few minutes ago, for those of you who weren't here, how excited I was to have somebody from Doctors Without Borders here to present who does not work in the medical field, but provides all the care and support and triage that goes into making the care and support and triage that Doctors Without Borders does possible. So I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement today. The UW Combined Fund Drive acknowledges that we live and work on the traditional territories of the Duwamish and Coast Salish peoples, and that we occupy this land. We recognize this acknowledgement does not replace authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, but we hope that it honors with gratitude the land and its original inhabitants. And for those of you I don't know, my name is Jolynn Mason. I am the campaign manager for the UW Combined Fund Drive, and I am thrilled you can join us today. Every year we select a nonprofit that we feature throughout the campaign, so throughout our fall workplace giving campaign, and this year we picked the incredibly well-known, incredibly respected, incredibly awesome Doctors Without Borders as our featured nonprofit. I think most people have probably heard of Doctors Without Borders. They work in more than 70 countries. They have nearly 500 missions. They've served over 1 million people in the last year, which is pretty amazing. And I'm so thrilled to be able to promote their work and highlight their work. You know, I think we think about Doctors Without Borders a lot when there's a natural disaster or there's a war, something happens where international chaos and turmoil are front of mind, but they are there in countries providing care and support before and after things happen. And so, you know, once the flood goes away and it's out of the news, people still need to be taken care of. And it's amazing the work they're doing to do that, to provide that safety, that support, and meet people's needs. And as I said, I'm especially excited today to welcome Beri. Not only is he our first non-medical MSF speaker, he spent over 2 decades working in operations, logistics, and supply chain management in different industries that span hospitality, supply chain services, humanitarian aid, and e-commerce. I will also shout out Ricky's family as proud UW alums. Ricky is not a UW alum, but we'll make him a temporary dog for the day. He joined MSF in 2014 and has completed 4 missions in South Sudan, Kenya, Jordan, and most recently in Sudan. With MSF, he's been involved in emergency and non-emergency project settings and served as an MSF Seattle charter member from 2018 to 2021. Within MSF, he was responsible for logistics, supply chain, human resources, and general administration, which is a lot of stuff. So I'm especially excited that you can join us. When not working with MSF, Ricky currently works in the e-commerce space for Seattle-based startups. So please join me, everyone, in welcoming Beri today. Yay!
Well, thank you for having me. And so it looks like you guys have had some MSF speakers on the medical side. So I'm happy to bring the log side. So we do say logistician in the fancy term, but I'll be using the word log quite a bit, just so we're aware. And I'll also just be using the abbreviation MSF when speaking about Doctors Without Borders. So just a few things. To highlight also my UW family, both my parents did their grad work at the University of Washington, and so did my brother. I grew up going to watch Don James Husky football at Husky Stadium. I just, for some reason, was just not able to get into the University of Washington when the time came. So, but I'm a huge Husky fan, and I still live in the Seattle area, so I get to go to some dog games here and there. So starting off, MSF, you guys are well aware of, and you kind of already know a little bit about what they do. And I would be, the New York office would be probably disappointed in me if I don't start off going through some of MSF's principles. So the way I'm going to break down, I think the next 30 minutes really is kind of walking through a little bit about what MSF does, And we can kind of move through some of that because I'm assuming you guys are already kind of aware of a lot of the activities. And then I really just wanted to get into my journey into MSF, the missions I've gone on, the type of work that logisticians do. And really during that time, I do just want to open it up to questions, or if you guys feel more comfortable doing a Q&A after, we can do that. Sometimes questions come up when I'm just speaking about a topic. So feel free to ask, or we can kind of move that way, but that will be the breakdown. So who is MSF? Doctors Without Borders, as you guys know, works in 70+ countries. Currently, and MSF works off of some very basic humanitarian principles, which are neutrality, impartiality, and independence. A lot of these principles have allowed us to be in areas, and myself also, in areas of the world that most can't access. And that neutrality piece of it is probably one of the most important things in this journey. And that simply just means that MSF does not take a particular side on a political crisis. In war zones, we stay as neutral as possible and push the first emphasis, which is emergency care for the population in need. One thing I did want to highlight in this picture, and when we talk about neutrality, is this little vest, that the white vest that the gentleman is wearing. That is hands down probably the most important thing that you can carry on you or be wearing when you're working for Doctors Without Borders. I'm amazed how often that vest or t-shirt has worked me out of situations where we have ran into either armed actors or things like that, because they recognize the logo, they understand that we are just here for emergency care and to provide healthcare, and a lot of that healthcare ideally is maybe going to their family. So you'll hear a lot of MSF people talk about how important that vest is and how important that t-shirt is. It's something that we, a lot of us cherish and hold on to, even when we leave missions, when we have silk-stained vests and so things like that. Impartiality, again, basically again saying that anybody that's in medical need will get medical care. And that is one thing MSF stands by. It does not mean just because you are considered maybe part of the armed militia or armed group in the conflict that you do not deserve care. So MSF does not ask questions on when you're walking into a hospital. The only thing that we ask is that if you are carrying an AK-47 or a gun or a knife, that those things are left outside of the hospital and you will be given care. Doesn't matter who you are. And the next one, independence. And independence really just plays into the factor of how MSF fundraises. We are not, MSF in general is not beholden to any governments or does not take government funding in the sense that there's no other interest involved in how we spend our money. Also, a little bit about how MSF looks at their funding. It is considered an overall pool of money. It's not considered that this, for example, one of the kind of examples that we give is when the earthquake hit Nepal. A lot of organizations were asking money directly for only Nepal recovery. MSF, all the money goes into a pool so we can move that money when needed. So if the earthquake in Nepal is either under control or the emergency care is under control, we can move those funds and go to the next either disaster or war zone or where things are needed. So a little bit about the principles and what they kind of drive for MSF. Simply put, this map can show you pretty clearly where we work, all the red areas. You can see that we're in about 70 countries. I think as of today, we're at 478 individual projects across the globe, across those 70 countries with about 60,000 plus individuals working across those 70 countries. To give you a quick breakdown on the map, a lot of what is happening in the red area in the continent of Africa is basically everything from you're treating internally displaced people to conflict, to armed conflict, and then just general care from malaria to respiratory issues. A lot of people always ask us why we're in maybe Russia or Belarus or Ukraine, countries that maybe they would not see A lot of that work is around TB, HIV prevention. A lot of that work in southern part of the continent of Africa as well is around TB and HIV. India is also a TB and HIV program. So we do have our reasons why we work in certain areas. You can see France and Italy. A lot of this has to do with the migration and refugee push from parts of the Middle East and other parts of North Africa. Those represent some of the camps there. So we are spread out quite substantially, and it is something that within MSF we talk about quite a bit. Do we need to be in all 70 countries at all times? And what is the reason why we're there? That debate is always hardy and sometimes heated within MSF chat groups. So a lot of what we kind of kicked it off is, what is MSF's main purpose in what we provide as a humanitarian organization? And I always like to start this off as it's a bit of a difficult topic to discuss because it needs context. Our first and foremost is emergencies. That is what MSF is very good at. That's what we are strong at. We can respond very quickly. For example, in Nepal, after the earthquake, we were on the ground within 24 hours. And we had earthquake kits, kits meaning stuff to get set up within 48 hours on the ground. We were one of the first. And that's the same in Haiti. We were one of the first to be on the ground. So we, in general, would not say that we're there for long-term care. That does not mean that MSF does not end up staying on in certain countries for longer-term care, or where the Ministry of Health cannot provide that care. So war and conflict zones are probably our number one response. And that can be anything from internally displaced people in a civil war that's like, for example, that's been going on in South Sudan since 2014, or things that, from my own experience, what's currently happening in Sudan with Darfur, Blue Nile, and other areas. And then the other area that we respond to is really epidemics and pandemics, right? Coronavirus being one, and things like that. But epidemic could be possibly things that are happening. For example, what happened after the earthquake in Haiti with the cholera response. That is things, again, that I would say that MSF really is very strong and can provide care very quickly and fast and efficiently. The other area that we work into is refugees and internally displaced people. I'll speak a little bit more about that further down. My first mission was a refugee and internally displaced project. So it was a non-emergency project, but the need for emergent healthcare was still very much in need. And as always, like I said earlier, exclusion. Everyone is welcome to healthcare. It does not matter what side. If we're in a conflict zone, it does not matter what side you are on. As long as, again, we say this, as long as your guns stay outside and in your arms, you can come into any hospital that MSF has open. So I think one of the big questions is, how do we respond? And what kind of activities do we provide once we do respond? This is actually one of my favorite pictures. This picture is actually quite old. It was one of the first pictures I saw in my initial training as a logistician. One of the requirements initially when I was joining MSF was asking if I knew how to ride a motorbike, which I did not, but I did learn very quickly, and how to ride a quad bike. This is just an interesting picture because a lot of what we do is be creative in how we move product. And you can see those are actually in this picture, those are ice boxes, temperature controlled. And it's one of the most amazing things that MSF, still for me, when I joined MSF, how we can move temperature controlled product across the globe in numerous fashions. So this being one of them. So medical activity is the key to what we, what we do. Right? That is our focus. We do have other focuses as an organization as time goes on, one of them being water and sanitation, which is in direct correlation to medical activities, but I'll get to that in a little bit. So this picture, as you can see, was in South Sudan in 2015. This isn't a picture that I provided, but this was the program that I was working on, and this was the hospital I was working on. I was there in 2015. I landed in South Sudan about 2 months after the civil war started. So medical activities, a really kind of quick overview of what we do, right? And this is from 2021. These statistics were provided by the New York office for this presentation for me. So you can see simply outpatient consultations. We've done over 2.5 million. Vaccine doses administered, malaria cases, which is one of the bigger areas that we work in. Deliveries, which I am very familiar with after my first mission. I learned a lot about maternity health, but deliveries, and this is very important to what we do. Children treated in hospitals, malnutrition is one big area that we work in. Oh, sorry. So just again, a few of the things that we work in, areas we work on the medical side of it. To add a little bit more to that, emergency room consultations, TB. TB is something that does not get a lot of representation, but it's something that we work on quite a bit. And then another area that is growing substantially for us, and this is really just truly the unfortunate piece of modern warfare, is surgical. And I'll dive into a little bit more of that because I did, one of my major missions was in Ramtha, Jordan, which was a surgical emergency program for South Syrians who've been wounded from shrapnel. But this is a very big growing piece of it. And this is an area that we also just in general struggle in the recruitment of surgeons. It is something that we are trying to drive to and get better at, but it's something that's becoming a bigger and bigger piece of MSF as time goes on. And very much you can see at the bottom here, right-hand corner, the COVID-19 hospitalizations, something very new for Doctors Without Borders. But I appreciate their response time when this happened and starting to treat in that area. A couple of things that we are not always showing here is other areas that we support, which is mental health, which is also becoming a larger piece of MSF's programming. And that is mostly started to become a bigger piece of MSF's programming after the initial US invasion of Iraq. And we saw the outpouring of refugees that were going to Jordan, and a lot of people just really needed mental health programming once they landed in Jordan as refugees. Reproductive health and healthcare and education is another large piece that we're trying to grow out as an organization. And overall, just health promotion. Again, those are things that we're trying to drive to as the organization gets a little bit bigger and has a broader reach into the overall healthcare system. So who actually executes on these types of activities? So I always try to tell people are, I think sometimes just based on the name, don't realize that there is a massive supporting group behind the activities that we do. And the split today, I believe, is about 60-40. So we would say about 60% of our teams are medical, about 40% is support. And support can be everything from a person like myself, a logistician, to HR, to finance, to water and sanitation. That list goes on. But looking at this picture actually, the first one, the physicians, that was taken in Ramtha, Jordan, and was at the surgical program there. My favorite, and who I still consider the backbone of MSF, is nurses. Hands down, without nurses, I don't think any of our medical activities actually function. And this is just my personal opinion, working with surgeons and physicians throughout the time. When it comes to management and project management, nurses are the people that hold it down. So a lot of respect over the years, working with numerous great nurses. The next big piece that we're trying to grow out, and again is very important, is surgeons. Surgeons are definitely are treated very differently within MSF because of the expertise, and their time commitments are very different in regards to missions. Most surgeons work on 2 to 3 week rotations. You're on call 24 hours a day, and then you're sent home due to burnout. So it's a rarity that a surgeon would stay on longer than 3 weeks in a particular mission. And surgeons in general would have zero management of any workers, things like that. That is all taken care of them, right? The other big piece you can see here, anesthesiologist, a big piece of what we do in surgical programs. And who else helps? Lab technicians, not a huge piece of what we do today in every mission, but becoming a bigger piece as technology allows it. Epidemiologist, again, as data collection, analytics, many of you guys are probably very used to the AWS world. This is becoming a very big piece of what we do. And it's something that we're all learning to work with. And usually what you'll have is you'll have a country epidemiologist that will come in and represent all the projects. But again, a growing piece of our overall puzzle. Pharmacist, a very key, important part of it, always will be. And then we get to, well, my favorite part and who we are, the other side of the supporting staff, which is logisticians, water and sanitation, which is a huge piece of what we do. And I cannot stress that enough. And many of you guys probably know how easily that just correlates to overall health and what we do. Water and sanitation is something that I have actually taken extra courses on to learn about it, because I'm just, me personally, just fascinated with, water and the well water and what it can do and how we can actually reduce care. We can reduce the amount of care we need to provide just through this one action. Construction, electrical, mechanical experts, this is all needed. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in further slides. And then the other big piece is finance, human resources, administrative professionals. A lot of this is needed at a country level, and then sometimes it's needed at a project level. In this arena, a lot of people like myself with a very big business background are asked to kind of do a lot of everything. So I will speak to that a little bit later. In one of my projects, I oversaw logistics, water and sanitation, finance, human resources, and administrative. So I managed a staff of 150 people at a single project. But again, this is a very big need and something that's a bit forgotten when people are looking at MSF in general. So one of the big things we like to talk about in MSF is also, and this goes back to, how we look at donations and things like that, is I think a lot of people have the viewpoint that MSF is purely just expats, which is probably the furthest thing from the truth. A majority of our workers are locally hired within the Ministry of Health or from just local hiring. So one of the things we look at is, here's a nice little kind of chart to show you, locally hired staff, you can see is at 83%. And that is a very big piece of what we do, and a very big piece of what expats do. A lot of what expats do is actually just interviewing, training, managing, teaching. Your hands-on experience in what you do actually in the field is a lot more reduced than you would actually think. Your job is there not to execute on the operation. Your job is there to manage and basically teach what we expect out of the SOPs and that. But headquarters staff at about 9%, international staff at about 8%. And I was one of the fortunate ones to be chosen in that international staff piece. And then, another big piece, again, this drives back to how we hire, also a piece of our funding. You can see that individuals make up about 94% of MSF's overall funding, which is a very kind of a thing that we wear on our chest. We're very proud of that as MSF, especially when you start breaking down, looking at other organizations. And one of the things that we definitely are not, scared of saying is that we take no U.S. government funding. And that is something that MSF has stopped. MSF has also stopped taking funding, which is not on this, from the EU and most governments within the EU. I do think there are one or two outside of the EU, like Sweden and a few other governments that we do take some funding from, but very minimal. And then the other piece that is growing coming from corporations. So you can see that it's a pretty large budget for the year, $623 million for 2021. That number fluctuates. I've seen it as high as 700 million, but you can see it usually fluctuates between in the years. When I first started with MSF, I think our operating budget was around 525. So in a span of 6 years, it's gone up by about 100 million. But that's also showcasing that unfortunately the need is is gone up substantially over the last 6-7 years. So again, just a little more MSF type of things. You can see what our expenditures are. Many of you guys have probably already seen this. Program services is at 85%. So again, that's something we hang our hat on. That majority of our dollars go to actual physical programs. Management costs, being people like myself and the staff we hire, you can see makes up about 1% of the overall expenditure. And then fundraising, which does eat up dollars, is about 14%. And this is a number that MSF is working on to lower. Unfortunately, just the current economics of fundraising has also changed a little bit too. So at the end of the day, we always say it, we are up against people like the Gates Foundation. As much as it doesn't sound like that we are, even though they're long-term care and we're not, we're still fighting for those same dollars sometimes. So that is something that I know MSF takes very seriously and is continuing to work on. So I'll kind of work through this pretty quickly. As you can see, project locations, Africa represents 47% of the overall total. Middle East, which is unfortunately growing at about 15. That was when I first started. I think that was down towards 6 or 7%. It's now making up a bigger piece of our chunk overall. The Asia Pacific, which is around HIV and TB, is about 14. And this Americas number, which has substantially grown as well. When I joined in 2014, we had 0 programs in America, and now we're at about 10%. And a lot of that has around just the movement of people across borders is what we really represent there. And Europe also has just been the last like 5-6 years, and that's mostly just due to the refugee camps that have been set up outside of certain borders that we provide healthcare there. The largest country that we work in and the longest serving country that we worked in is the Democratic Republic of Congo. That is just, in my honest opinion, unfortunately, just a revolving door that we struggle to get out of. I think we've talked about it in the past, but the need is just so drastic there that I just don't foresee us ever leaving right now, at least in the near future. I don't see us leaving the Congo. And same with South Sudan. MSF has been in South Sudan for almost 35 years. And you initially went there for emergency care, and you ended up staying because you are basically the Ministry of Health, because there is none. And then you can see the rest of the countries, Afghanistan being one of the larger ones. That number has definitely gone down. But then you're also seeing the numbers in Sudan go up as regime change and political crisis has taken that country from a lower end spending money to a higher end. COVID-19 response, I'll just kind of leave this here. I'm not very familiar with our overall response to COVID-19. I was never involved in a lot of those projects, but it is a nice little map, and I'm happy to share this presentation, of course, afterwards. So that being said, I want to kind of get to the heart of it, and hopefully I know my time might be a little bit short, but people ask, MSF and why MSF? I hope people can see these pictures. I won't read that quote out loud, but that quote is from a brochure that was on my first training day. Both these pictures are from my first training day with MSF. After I was included, you go to a training in New York for US-based employees, and then you eventually go to a European training. And this was my first one in New York. And our opening kit was this survival guide to kidnapping. And that's how MSF starts off their training. So it puts things in quick perspective about what you're about to go do and the level that you're going to push yourself, not just from a professional standpoint, from just a physical, mental, stepping out of your comfort zone. MSF really does bring you there. My journey to MSF was not 100% straightforward. I was living and working in Washington, D.C., which you guys are probably familiar is the NGO capital of the US for the most part. And I went to so many happy hours and dinners where people were saying supply chain is a needed skill set in the NGO world. And the fact that people who are coming from a public health background are doing supply chain is not ideal. And that's really what kind of drove me to look into this field. and eventually, hopefully, kind of taking my skill set in supply chain to MSF. So I was accepted in 2014. I trained in Bonn, Germany. And then once I was in Bonn, Germany, it was November of 2014. The war in South Sudan had just broken out. And in my training in Bonn, Germany, I was selected to go to South Sudan as my opening mission. And I'll get into that in a second, but I just wanted to, people ask very simply, what is a logistician with MSF? What is it? What do we do? A logistician means a lot of things in MSF. Let's just be very clear. It means everything that's non-medical. So I thought some pictures might illustrate what we do for a day-to-day. This picture, this first one I'm showing here with the structure and frame, this is actually us breaking down the initial emergency maternity ward. So we had a tent, a large tent, we call it a rub hall, which was with no AC, no temperature control, which was your first maternity ward in this emergency in South Sudan, in a place called Batil. Batil is at the time was about 50,000 person refugee camp. So a logistician is in charge of breaking this down and then redistributing this maternity ward to where it's needed. A logistician in this other picture over here that looks like we're camping in the upper right-hand corner is us camping out in the middle of a region called Blue Nile in Sudan. We were allowed to, this is just FYI, this little area that we're camping in is guarded on all sides by a militia group, and that militia group is one that allowed us to access this area. And we were basically dropping off malaria, drugs, and other things to about 19 field hospitals in a conflict zone. Due to the high volatility of the fighting, we had to get in and out. So we would go in for 36 hours in the car, drop at all 18 locations, and then get out. This was a little nap time. We had about a 5-hour nap in between all of that. And that's us in the middle of the day trying to get our nap in. So other things logisticians do for MSF is move goods. That is a utility vehicle in the top right-hand corner. And if you can look at that picture, this truck had no lift gate. And if you are in the operational world, you can understand trying to move a very large truck without a lift gate is very difficult. So we had to figure out how to do that. So we found this hill. It's very hard to see, but we dug out our own lift gate out of mud. And then we drove that truck at 20 miles per hour right onto that truck. And the guy up there was on top of it the whole time. And you can't see me, but I'm in there driving that truck. So very unique and very different. You can be called on to do many things within MSF as a logistician. Other things we do. We move inventory, upper left-hand corner. That is staged medical goods and logistical goods that need to move from a warehouse in Kenya to a refugee camp in northern Sudan. How does that product move? Mostly in Africa, in the continent of Africa, it moves by bush plane or caravan plane in your lower left-hand corner. And you can fit about 1,000 kgs per plane, and you get about one plane every 1 to 2 weeks. Just to put that in perspective, that plane's also got to carry medical staff, and it's got to carry food to last the team 2 weeks. Sometimes food is the first thing dropped, which leaves the medical staff and us kind of figuring out where to eat for the next 2 weeks. And we move things by donkey, by car. You move things based on what is available to you and how you're going to move it. And honestly, it's problem solving. It's figuring out what resources you have. And in this situation, this is also in Blue Nile. We figured out donkeys were the best way to move grain. And so you can't see the chain, but there's about 7 or 8 other gentlemen behind him that are moving grain for us, along with medical supplies. So I know I'm coming up on my time, but Batil Refugee Camp is my first mission in South Sudan. The map up on top shows you kind of where we were located. You can see that we were on the Ethiopian and Sudan border. The bottom corner shows a little bit of our office space. That was where all the logisticians. So we had an electrician. We had myself who was doing supply chain. We had a construction manager. And then we all this shared an assistant that worked for us. But one of the things I just want to show here was this is picture was taken in 2014. This is the Juba International Airport. I'm not really sure if you can see the detail of that picture, but a lot of that airstrip is mortared out by mortars. And that was my first introduction into South Sudan when I was flying in. And when I asked the pilot, are we landing there? He said, absolutely. I said, how do you land on mortar shell holes? He says, you bounce. And he was dead serious. You bounce. And we literally came up, hit the ground hard, and bounced our way over the holes. And I was blown away. I was there for 9 months, living in the camp. A little bit about just overall life here. This upper left-hand corner. This was our happy hour for the week. On Fridays, we had a gentleman that would come, and for about 25 bucks a piece, he would sell us a tall boy beer. And we would have this one very lukewarm beer for 1 hour, smoke a lot of cigarettes, and just talk. So this woman right here was our midwife, a nurse in this perspective picture. Living conditions. So people always ask about this. In this situation, we all had safari tents. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, those are the size of the safari tents, and that was your living quarters. People always ask about food, and what I was kind of saying, we ran out of, unfortunately, sometimes on planes, expat food was the first thing that had to be moved off for medical supplies and medical personnel. So you revert back to what's happening in the local economy and you buy yourself protein. And that is what we have in the bottom left-hand corner. I know many people don't want to hear that, but that was our dinner for 10 days. And then just simple things, how we cooked. Most of it was over this type of fire, with coal. That is a pizza. We built a little pizza oven and we made some homemade pizza. So a little bit about the life and how we live and things like that. Expat life is very unique, and we can talk about that in a little bit. Next, I went to Rumta, Jordan, as a surgical program. Rumta is on the border of Syria and Jordan. This was an emergency program. Batil, where I was in South Sudan, was not an emergency program. This was an emergency program. We ran 2 full-time operating theaters, 24 hours a day. We averaged about 12 surgeries a day. We had an outpatient of about 150 that were in line basically for surgeries constantly. So we were about a half mile off the border. And just a few pictures to show the seriousness of modern warfare. This girl here on the left, that was all shrapnel wounds. And this kid right here, also on the right, all shrapnel wounds. The Syrians were very good at spreading fear through shrapnel bombs. And that's mostly what we dealt with. This was a very large program. We had 15 expats and about 160 staff. I managed all 160 of the overall staff, and I managed the administrative part of all of the expats. In this program, I ran HR, finance, supply chain, logistics, and general administration. I had 9 direct managers reporting to me, and I was here for 8 months. Just a couple pictures that just shows you how close the Syrian border was. This picture was taken on the upper right-hand corner. It does not showcase, but the Russians got involved in the war in 2015, and some of those light flashes are missiles, bombs dropping right next to our hospital. So we were on the roof watching those missiles drop on the Syrian side of the border. And a little bit in the bottom right-hand corner is just a bit about staff. In Rumta, the staff was massive in an expat standpoint. And really quickly to go through this first gentleman here with the glasses pointing was German. The gentleman with the headscarf is Canadian, German, Egyptian, Ecuadorian, Polish, and the list goes on. So your team is very international, and working with an international team, sometimes I always joke with people, can be a bit like a reality TV show. It's kind of like the real world, actually. It's very humorous. I am skipping one program. I did go on to work my 4th mission in Kenya in a place called Lokichoki. Kenya was a support position. It was not emergency. It was all what we consider HQ. And I was a supply coordinator there. And my job was making sure raw materials came in to support the Congo, Central African Republic, and South Sudan. So my job is really working with our pharmaceutical companies in India, our raw material suppliers in Asia and in Europe to bring in materials into Kenya, which would eventually move on to those places. And lastly, in 2021, in January, I was asked to go to Tanidabab in Gedaref refugee camp in Sudan. This is a new and old refugee camp. This refugee camp had 75,000 people cross over from Ethiopia due to the Tigray conflict that's flared up in 2020 and 2021. I kind of wanted to highlight this map because you can see we were tasked to build a fully functional hospital in 3 months with no raw materials on the ground when we landed. And Khartoum is a center of commerce in Sudan, and we had to move all of this product to Gedaref, and then from Gedaref, we had to drive another 2 hours down to Tanidabab to get material on very unpaved roads. And just to kind of give you an example of what we were doing, on the left-hand side, that is the foundation for the hospital. And we did succeed. We built the whole hospital from the ground up in 12 weeks. There was a team of 6 of us that was sent out in a complete emergency capacity. I was given notice on a Wednesday. My visa came through on Monday, and I left on Tuesday. And this picture will always make me laugh. This is the road to the refugee camp. It is about on the right-hand side. It's about a 2.5-hour drive once we get on this dirt path. It's in the middle of nowhere. And you can see there's medical goods in the back of this car. In our first attempt, the car broke down. To go there, we were stranded on the roadside for about 7.5 hours before somebody could come get us. Some of the fun of MSF. And that's a little bit about me. And I open it up to questions. I know that was a lot, and I kind of went quickly in 25 minutes, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Ricky. That was, I'm going to change the view and do side by side, do gallery. That was amazing. Thank you. It was fascinating. Can you tell us a little more, like what prompted you to want to be involved in NGO work? It seems pretty specialized.
Yeah. So I think a couple things. I think one thing I always try to tell people, so I do a lot of recruiting things for MSF. That's a little bit more of my bread and butter. And one of the honest opinions I give to people is people join MSF for multiple reasons. And the reason you join should not be your overall defining reason, but you should be very honest about yourself. And MSF always tells you that. Don't lie to yourself of why you're here. And in all honesty, for me, initially, my journey was through heartbreak. I was engaged to be married. That did not work out. I wanted a big change in my life, and I'd always known about MSF, and I respected them. And honestly, I thought, what better change in my life than going to do this type of work, not knowing that I would eventually get hooked, which I am. So you'll meet so many people across the MSF board who are amazing people, but yes, some of them are honestly like said, yeah, I just got divorced and I needed a change in my life. Or, I mean, we had 2 doctors that I've met who were like, my practice went bankrupt and just need a change in my life. So one of the things I always try to tell people is don't lie about the reason you're here, right? Mm-hmm. There's probably good in everybody and you are there to help, but the reason that got you there is something that MSF really teaches you to own and understand and really work through, because you'll need that mentally when you eventually get there. And I think the other piece that drove me was I lived in Washington, D.C. for 9 years, and I can't tell you the amount of people I talked to who just said supply chain logistics and warehousing is an area that we just struggle in. And mm-hmm. I'm not trying to knock anybody with a public health background, but they're just like, we have these people who come from a public health background that are asked to do a job that they're either not really interested in or they're just not trained on, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what kind of drove me to it. And then I realized once I was on the ground, they were 100% right. Supply chain expertise is drastically underrepresented.
So can you tell us a little bit about, you were talking about, again, I don't know if you call it a deployment or you're being asked to go out into the field when you went on your last mission. So like Wednesday, like everything happens and then you're on a plane the next Tuesday. Like, how does that work? How do you manage your like non-MSF life? Like I've always been really curious about that because
Yeah, so let's break this down into kind of two camps. For the people on this call who are in the medical field, who are nurses, well, I'm going to take nurses out of this for a minute, but people who are anesthesiologists, surgeons, doctors, you were treated very differently in MSF than the rest of us. You were treated with golden gloves.
As they are in the real world.
Yes. Meaning that your deployments are based around your schedule. A lot of surgeons can come out for 2 to 3 weeks, which is really just PTO for them. And a lot of doctors can come out for short missions because either they are, they can either their own practice or wherever they're practicing, they can get away for a handful of weeks, right? And it's becoming more and more a commonplace, especially in the US, where hospitals want people to go out and do work, and they're allowing people to. The other perspective of it is people like myself. In the non-medical field, MSF prefers a 9-month deployment.
Okay.
You can do as short as 3 months once you get some experience, because I've done 9, 8, 3, and 3. For a person like myself, you are picking up your life. That is just the honest truth. You have to kind of figure out how it works for you. When I first joined MSF, I owned a house in Washington, DC. I moved my life. I didn't know what was going to come afterwards. So I rented my home, put my stuff in storage. I packed a backpack. And that was kind of it. I've actually never, ever lived in that house again, and it's continued to be rented. I always say this with a caveat that also falls in the nurse category. Nurses at MSF cannot come for short periods because you are the core of the medical side of management. You hold it all together, and we cannot have turnover in that. So nurses are really expected to do 6 to 9 month missions, no less. So yes, you are picking up your life. And in regards to your other point, for the Sudan mission, for people like myself, again, I work in e-commerce. I'm a Seattle startup guy. I mean, I quit my job. That was simply, this was in my life is top of the chain for me. And I know that personally. So quitting a job was very easy for me. And in retrospect, over the years, I know this is something I want to do. So I've continued to plan for it, right? From my savings account to everything. I plan my life around now going on mission every 12 to 18 months.
Wow.
So eventually you'll kind of learn, but yes, for people who in the non-medical side, MSF is asking you to pick up your life a little bit. So it becomes a little difficult. And if you're married or with a partner, it's even more difficult.
Yeah. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, or you can just ask. Okay, Candy has a question. For the purposes of emphasizing how important logistics are, has there been a time where a transport of goods have been delayed and greatly impacted operations?
Oh, 100%. I can't. My best example is generator parts. Generator parts are a huge piece of what we do in keeping hospitals and ventilators and things like that up and running. And finding an expertise. For example, we're not going to send a single person to a mission who's just an expert in generators, right? So a person like myself has to learn how to project manage that, or another logistician. In South Sudan, our generator went down in the middle of the night with 4 babies on ventilators. And the unfortunate piece is that we lost all 4 babies. And we couldn't get generator parts in from anywhere. We tried Khartoum, we tried Juba, we tried Nairobi. We even hired an organization called Mission Aviation, which is a Christian organization, to fly to Cape Town for us to get parts, but that would have taken 72 hours. So yes, it happens all the time. And the biggest piece of it that affects us is in the cold chain. When you're talking about vaccines, cold chain breakdowns are constant when you're in low resources settings. And the big piece of it is you don't have the microeconomics to fix those things, right? If a cold chain goes down, we don't have an expert who knows how to fix refrigeration, right? So you're asking somebody like myself, again, to read a manual and figure out how to fix refrigeration, which I have. I've literally read an MSF manual in the middle of the night with a screwdriver and a couple other things, and we put together back the engine for the refrigeration. So it constantly happens. It's something that you have to problem solve around. And ideally, you're hoping your forecasting, especially on the medical side, is on point.
Yeah. Okay. Next, we have a question. Oh my goodness, look at all these questions. One from Travis. Can you say a little bit about getting hooked on the work? Is it the people? Is it the impact? Is it all of it? Do you just like MacGyvering refrigerators? Like, tell us what your why is, Ricky.
So again, going back to the overall point, being honest with yourself, right? I am an adventure seeker, simple as is in my personal life. I heli ski, I mountain climb. MSF is a mixture of all of that, right? The adrenaline of taking a caravan plane into the middle of nowhere where nobody's ever been, with the fact that when you land, you're on your own, is absolutely fascinating to me in my own personal. So that's a bit of me. What got me hooked on it really from the work standpoint is you have to problem solve. It's an amazing piece. You think you're going to come into something that's so driven by SOPs, which it is, but the amount you have to be able to problem solve, which hooked me. I love the problem solving in logistics and supply chain, thinking on your feet and working with the team. And the other piece that I loved was the international staff. And that's a personal standpoint. I have friends all around the world now. And I always tell people, if I could pick a country and I could end up on a couch and have a free place to stay. And that is something that is, that's just amazing. The friendships that form in this type of arena are lifelong friendships.
I love that. Yeah, so it is a little bit of all of it, the people, the impact. I am not an adventure person. I am a sedentary person, so I'm always excited to hear about kind of how the other half lives. Or I don't know, maybe it's not a whole half. This is a great question from Mari, and I love it. We have tons of stuff that we pack up during the campaign, and so she wants to know, when you're packing up supplies, that it looks like you would need to, when you are packing up supplies, it looks like you would need to take into consideration the terrain that you are going to encounter. Do you know in advance if it's going to be rough terrain, or do you just kind of pack things in a way, you just like, we'll throw it all in a box and we'll put a lot of batting around it so that they can withstand bouncing down a runway or a rutted or muddy road, or apparently being on the back of a motorcycle riding on a log?
Yeah. So yes, we do a lot of reconnaissance, right? So for example, the picture I'm showing you on the right-hand side, the Toyota, that was actually a small reconnaissance. We actually, before we started shipping heavy duty material for the hospital, we wanted to test the road to the camp. So we do a lot of it, not saying that we're going to be perfect. And so we do things like that. And we also understand, we do a lot of reconnaissance of knowing like, all right, one of the big, especially in this arena in Sudan, the rainy season is a big factor in what we do, because the rain basically turns this into what we call cotton soil. If you guys have heard that term, it's basically it's like quicksand. Everything sinks and you get stuck. So yes, we kind of know this. We plan around it. We plan around the rainy season. Like, for example, we want to get heavier goods into camps before the rainy season, and then lighter goods later on. But sometimes this is thrown off, right? Because our first duty is medical care. So if the situation calls for more medical supplies or things like that, that's the first priority, and you got to figure it out. And we've done it. Like, I've ridden a quad bike through 7 hours of mud to bring malaria drugs to the Blue Nile. So sometimes you adjust, and sometimes your back and legs suffer because you're on a quad for 7 hours. But yeah, there is planning, not always perfect. And in these situations, again, comes down to problem solving sometimes. Okay.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time because we said we would be done at 1, and it's almost 1. And I just want to say how much I appreciate you coming in to talk to us today. This was really incredible and informative, and it was actually really apparent how much joy being part of this organization brings you. And I'm happy that you were able to share it with some of our folks at UW, and we look forward to sharing this talk out with a broader audience. So thank you so much for being here. It was an amazing presentation, and yay, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.